Who can God use? Who can God use? Everyone. That's the church answer, isn't it? And it's true. God can use anyone. We have a value here at Good Shepherd. We have a core value. And the value is everyone, every day. Everyone, every day. Now, maybe you haven't picked up on this yet. The value everyone, every day, it's not the word everyone. It's every one. That's intentional. Our namesake is Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. The imagery of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. Jesus tells us that he will leave the 99 to go after the... You already know God's favorite number. Jesus prays that we would be, as he and the Father are one. Every one. It speaks of inclusion. It speaks of welcome. It speaks of something that's really important, which is individuality. God made every one unique. Every one in the image of God. And we believe that every one matters. Not just pastors or leaders, not just a select few. Every one. Every day God can use. God does use. That's our belief. That's our theology. That's our faith. And yet, practically speaking, I think we often behave very differently, don't we? We know that the right answer is that God can use anyone. God uses everyone. And yet sometimes we convince ourselves that God only uses those who are put together. Those who have their theology figured out. Those whose faith is really certain. And there's very little doubt. God certainly uses those people, right? Sometimes we think that God has to use those that are just extroverted or overly confident, the good public speakers, those that are good at leading meetings. God uses those people, but other folks, I don't know. Functionally, I think we do struggle with this. And sometimes we wonder and worry, well, does God really use me? Me? I know God uses everyone and anyone, and I know that that's true, and I'm told that, and I've heard that, and yet I don't know how I'm being used in this grand story. I think today's reading and the whole series this summer gives us a beautiful reminder that, in fact, God can and does use ordinary, broken people. You know, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're named after the supposed writers of these Gospels, who were all disciples of Jesus. You know that. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And if there's like a hall of fame of like disciples or people that I think we imagine had life figured out, they would be in it, wouldn't they? I mean, there are whole books of the Bible. The Gospels are named after them. Certainly, they had it all together. And if you're a scholar of the Bible, you know that each of the four, there's three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's believed Mark was written first, the earliest of the manuscripts, even though it doesn't come first. Matthew does, for some reason. Mark was written first, and it's believed that the author of Matthew's Gospel and Luke's Gospel used Mark, the text, as an early manuscript. And then there's John's Gospel, which is much different. Each of the four Gospels, the writers at the time had a different audience in mind. They were writing to slightly different communities. John, the author of John's Gospel, was writing primarily to a Hellenistic world. A world influenced by Greek culture, Greek philosophy. That's why when you read John's Gospel, it sounds so different than the others. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It almost sounds like Plato is speaking, and that's intentional. John was writing to an audience influenced by people like Aristotle and Plato. Luke's Gospel, which is personally my favorite. I mean, I have a son named after it. Luke's Gospel was written primarily to a Gentile audience, written primarily to the poor. That's why in Luke's gospel, the shepherds in the birth story are the ones that are center stage. The day laborers, the outcasts. It's why Jesus' first sermon, the inauguration of his ministry, begins, "I have come to give recovery of sight to the blind, to set the prisoner free." The author of Luke is telling us, in other words, who he's writing to. Matthew's gospel was written primarily for a Jewish audience. Did you know that? It was written primarily to those that were a part of the historical tribe of Israel, the covenanted people. It was written by the least likely character that on paper would have automatically been disqualified from writing to the Jewish people. Did you know that? It's a scandal in itself in many ways. The Gospel of Matthew was written by someone that the everyday people in Israel absolutely despised. The tax collector. Now, this is not an ancient version of the IRS. That's not what it is. And if you work for the IRS, you don't get enough credit, okay? If you're out there, I don't know if we have anyone that does. Matthew was a Jewish man who had turned, in the people's eyes, a traitor. Matthew was collecting taxes for Rome. The people were occupied by a foreign military and government that was exploiting them of their limited resources to help build the Roman Empire. And Matthew was a central part of that. I don't want that to be lost on you. Matthew was the least likely character to become a disciple of Jesus who was a Jewish rabbi. Tax collectors were notorious for lining their own pockets as they lined the pockets of Rome. I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a minute. You're already despised by all of your people. You're caught up in a system of injustice and corruption. People already hate you on both sides. You have pressure from Rome to collect the tax and give money to the occupying government. You have your own people that you're collecting from that are already looking at you with vitriol, and you're in the middle of it all. Why not at least pad your own wallet? Comfort yourself a little bit. I imagine to be a tax collector at the time, you had to have not only thick skin, you had to have alligator skin. And day in and day out, you were caught up in this system. And it's here, this part that I just find so beautiful. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew. Now, this is Matthew writing this story. And he said to him, Jesus, follow me. And he rose and followed him. What I love about this is Jesus doesn't avoid the person that everyone despises. He doesn't go around them. He walks right to him. And he says, it's you. It's you that I want to come and follow me. Come be my disciple. Come learn my way. Come be a part of a story that will change the course of human history. But I love what Jesus doesn't say. At least it's not here. He doesn't say, Matthew, get your act together. Matthew, repent. Matthew, clean yourself up. Matthew, give all the money back. Matthew, get right with God. Get right with me. He simply invites Matthew to come and follow. And I think we have to be reminded of this. This is how Jesus, again and again and again, builds his team on earth. unlikely people. It's the same words he used for the fishermen that were with their dad in the boat. Come and follow me, unlikely people. It's the same spirit that we see God use in the Hebrew scriptures to Abram and Sarai. Come and be a part of this grand adventure. And they're looking at themselves like, what, me? We're well beyond childbearing years. We have no descendants. We're nobody. God is always using the least likely characters to be a part of this great story of restoration and healing. And I am always so enthralled when I hear people's stories, personal stories of how God has called them, invited them, nudged them, pushed them to discover a new reality, their sacred identity, their real calling in life. And it's not always into ministry, but I love Matthew's story because in so many times in my own life, I felt like Matthew. I've wondered, like me, I felt called into ministry, into a different way of living as a soldier deployed in Iraq. Far from church. I hadn't been to church in 3.5 years. I didn't feel called from sitting in a pew or singing in a choir or surrounded by chaos and cruelty and overwhelmed with so many different feelings. I started to sense that, me? I can't help but wonder if that's how Matthew felt. Are you sure you want me? I mean, imagine what Matthew is thinking. If I come follow you, you know, like, people don't like me. They might not like you then, Jesus. And then Jesus does something in the story that I think is lost on us. We don't quite get it culturally. It was even more profoundly scandalous. We're told that after Jesus calls the tax collector, the traitor, he goes to his house and eats with him. And other tax collectors start coming around because Matthew, these are his friends. This is his community. This is his motley group of people. And we're told sinners. You know, in the ancient world, sharing a table communicated more than I think it does in our culture. Sitting at a table in the ancient world communicated acceptance. It communicated closeness. You know the images we have of the Lord's Supper, right? They're kind of really close by. They're all on one side of the table. That probably didn't happen that way. They were probably all sitting around, but they're sitting in close proximity. There's even images of a disciple who is resting their head on the bosom of Jesus. There was a closeness. It's not like we had 3.5 feet of personal space like we do today. I mean, a lot of you, you guys are, you could fit another human in between you, right? This is culturally appropriate here, but not in the ancient world. The most intimate setting in society was around a table. It was around a meal. Your feet would touch underneath. You would be elbow to elbow. You were sharing and breaking bread. There were no real utensils. You were eating with your hands and you were eating food together. You were communicating a relationship. And here is what is so very religious in the worst sense. When Jesus is there later that night, eating with Matthew and his friends and the sinners, that's when the religious folk, the Pharisees, have a problem. And they say to the disciples of Jesus, why is your leader eating, in other words, with those people? Why is he eating with those people? And as I thought about it this week, every culture, every era of human history has always had a those people, hasn't it? We still have that in our society, those people, the ones that certainly are not acceptable to God. How dare Jesus eat with those people? This is what I'm talking about when I say functionally. We might answer, God can use anyone and everyone, but functionally, how is it that so many Christian communities, Christian denominations, and Christian people still look at others with that air of, well, not them? And I love what Jesus says. I love what he says. He says, I have come not for the healthy, but for the sick. Here's what Jesus is saying. It's not like Jesus is giving a blanket acceptance to the system of tax collection and exploitation and what Rome is doing and Matthew's role in it. It's not like Jesus is saying, hey, what these people do every day is totally cool. Just be cool with it. Jesus says, I have come for people that are hurting and are a part of hurting systems. But the most important line in this exchange is what follows. Jesus says, now listen to this and learn this. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. You see, the Pharisees and religious people throughout time have been consumed with somehow proving through their own posterity, through their own piety, that they have done enough to appease God. And that is just not the gospel. It's never been how it's supposed to work. Our psalm that we read last night, and we'll read at 11, speaks directly to this. The psalmist is writing about, it's kind of comical in a sense. It's not meant to be comedy, but I find it comical. The psalmist is writing about how God absolutely doesn't care about your unblemished doves or the cattle that you can sacrifice. The psalmist says, all of the cattle in all of the vineyards and all of the fields of the earth are already mine. I made them. Do you think I really care about what you bring to the altar so that you can, this is my phrase, chancel, prance around and act pious? Do you think I care about that? I don't. I don't at all. Because what Jesus came to do was to be the sacrificial lamb. He doesn't need us to offer something, a display of our own posterity in order for God to like us. Jesus here is saying, I don't desire sacrifice. I want mercy. I want an open heart. That's what I'm after. But do you know, I really believe that for the first 1,500 years of Christianity, from the time Jesus was crucified and risen up until the Protestant Reformation, the primary question people were trying to answer was Act 2 of the 4-part gospel story. They were trying to solidify around Act 2. Now let me explain. There are 4 parts to the gospel. Did you know that? This is oversimplified, but there are 4 parts to the salvation story and arc. Here's what they are: creation, fall, redemption, restoration. Creation, fall, redemption, restoration. God is a creator. God creates again and again, not just in Genesis. God is always creating. The stories of the Old Testament, God creates a new way. God gives another chance. God is always creating. Flowers rise every year, don't they? Fall, humanity's brokenness, sin, it's how we get it wrong. Cain killing his brother Abel, nation going to war against nation, humanity turning in on itself, creation, fall, the 3rd part of the story, redemption. And for about 1,500 years, Christians were obsessed with the 2 middle acts, fall, redemption, right? This was the big theological debate for so long. How are we saved? How many Hail Marys do you have to pray? How many sacrifices do you need to make to the church? How much do you need to go into a confessional booth? Does a priest have to pray on your behalf? Or can you communicate directly to God? This was Martin Luther's personal torment. His torment was, how can I be saved? How do I know I'm saved? Luther brought in, with extreme clarity, Luther's contribution through the Protestant Reformation was the 3rd part of the 4-part act, the redemption part. We're saved by grace through faith alone. In other words, it's not our sacrifice, it's what Christ has done for us. But here's just Lorne's take. I think for the last 500 plus years, Christianity at large, especially post-Enlightenment, has been overly obsessed with Acts 2 and 3, fall, redemption, fall, redemption, fall, redemption. And we forget that there's a fourth part to the four-part gospel narrative. Fall, redemption. Even our liturgy, and I love it, don't misinterpret me. Oftentimes we gather, and what's the first thing we do? We confess our sin. I'm not saying we shouldn't. Fall. And then we leave knowing that we're redeemed. We receive communion, grace, the announcement that as a called and ordained minister of the Church of Christ, I declare to you the entire forgiveness of your sins. We do this, fall, redemption, fall, redemption. It's beautiful, but it's not complete. Because the fourth part of the gospel story is restoration. What do we do having received grace upon grace upon grace? What do we do? How do we now live knowing that yes, we are broken and fallen, and yes, we are redeemed, and we need reminded of it all the time. But the point isn't just to come back here like, oh, I fell again. I'm redeemed again. I fell again. I'm redeemed again. It's to go out and participate in the work of restoring the world. Creation, fall, redemption, restoration. Folks, Lutherans know that we are saved by grace through faith. So we ought to get on with healing a broken world. That's what it's about. And sitting there with tax collectors and sinners and the religious people, how dare you eat with those people? Jesus says, I want you to learn one thing, and it might take you your whole life. I don't want sacrifice, I want mercy. I want mercy. And what happens right as Jesus says that? 2 stories of restoration. A man comes in who's a noble man, who has authority and stature. But he comes in seeking mercy, seeking hope, not judging who Jesus is eating with. And he says, my daughter has died, but if you only come. And as Jesus goes toward the man's house, a woman who is bent over in pain and agony and suffering reaches for his cloak. And there are 2 stories right on the heel of Jesus saying, I want you to learn mercy, not sacrifice, that show us what restoration looks like. Both of these women. And I love how the woman, the older woman, is called my daughter. I love that part. He's going to heal a little girl, but a woman is also a daughter. It's just beautiful. And they're healed. All summer long, we are exploring your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Yes, God is a creator. Yes, we are fallen. Yes, we know we're redeemed by Jesus. Your kingdom come. What Jesus is teaching the disciples to pray is their part in bringing the kingdom, not as a future, heavenly, eternal concept, but a daily reality that can be lived and experienced here. When Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, your kingdom come, I think he's encouraging them to participate in the 4th act of the gospel. Being a part of restoring anything and everything that's broken. Not because we get it right all the time, but because we already know the end of the story. All redemption is the middle of the story. But if you read all the way through Revelation and you study good theology, not toxic theology, you know that the whole story at the end of Revelation is a story of restoration. The great city we're described in Revelation has a river that runs through the middle of it. The trees are sprouting again in the midst of the chaos. It's a story of the earth being restored to wholeness. It's not about a rapture and people escaping up into heaven. That comes from like 1840 to 1860 theology. The story of salvation is actually a story of healing and restoration and renewal. Your kingdom come, your will be done. This summer, let's be a church and a people that know we don't need to sacrifice anything at the altar to be loved. Let's instead receive from the table a gift that can fuel us to be a part of the restorative work that God has given us to do. That's the type of church I want to be a part of. That's the kind of church Good Shepherd is. That's the kind of church Good Shepherd is going to continue to be. A church and a people that know we are saved by grace through faith alone. We don't need to earn it. We don't need to prove it. And just like Matthew, who Jesus sees beyond the label tax collector, Jesus is calling us. He's calling you to walk with him and to heal and restore a world with grace and peace.